Hey, what is up? Welcome to another video slash episode. I am Jellis Vaas, and I survived 4 years ago a sudden cardiac arrest. But this video slash episode is not gonna be about sudden cardiac arrest. It's actually gonna be an in-depth video about heart disease, because whilst I started the Heart Warrior project 4 years ago when I had my sudden cardiac arrest and things became a lot more acute related to my heart, I've been living with a progressive life-threatening heart disease since I was 6 years old. It was actually during a medical examination at school that the doctor just listened to my heart and she asked me a couple of questions, and she was very curious just about, how I was feeling. She asked me if I was nervous. That medical examination at school led to further investigations. What came out quite fast was actually that I have a life-threatening heart disease called arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, or ACM in short. I've spent a lot of time in the hospital, went through quite a few procedures, ablation procedures. I've had so many Holters over my lifetime. Basically every cardiologist specialized in heart disease or arrhythmias has seen me. I always accepted that as just a normal part of my life without really questioning it so much. But now, being older, I'm like, yeah, that was not a very normal childhood or teenage years. But again, in general, yeah, I didn't feel restricted in any way from my heart disease and lived quite a normal life, or even quite of an adventurous one. I've did Thai box, I've trained in a camp in Thailand for a while. I've climbed in the past quite a lot of mountains. I was very much into alpinism. The Mont Blanc, the Matterhorn, the Grosslochner, Triglav, the Zugspitze, quite a lot more of mountains that I've climbed. I've became actually a dive master, so I've done over hundreds of dives. All of that I did while I had the heart disease, but I wasn't limited by my cardiologist, and I wasn't feeling anything really significant. I felt pretty good actually, despite the heart disease that I had, up until, when I was 28, when I had my sudden cardiac arrest when I was asleep. There things became more serious. Now that's a whole story, not for this video. Now the intention of this video slash episodes is to focus in depth on, living with a progressive life-threatening heart disease. And I just want to share what I've learned, some insights, some takeaways, some pieces of advice. Now, I'm not gonna be the only one to do that. I've also invited other people with heart disease, other people from our community here at the Heart Warrior Project, Karen and George. They're gonna introduce themselves very soon. They're also going to share their perspective from the heart disease that they have. So there's actually a combination of multiple people here sharing just what they've learned. Alongside that, I've actually invited Dr. Sears, who is a clinical health psychologist who does incredible work on ICDs and increasing the quality of life from people with an ICD, on heart disease, on sudden cardiac arrest, and he's gonna share his expertise, his advice, his practical insights on living with heart disease. Hopefully, with this video slash episode, you can feel slightly less alone in this journey that's not easy, and it can be very, very lonely. Just a few disclaimers. Just know that the heart disease that I have, the one that Karen has, the one that George has, can be very different than yours, right? So certain things that we will share might totally not be applicable to you, or it might just be different to you. You might have different restrictions, or you might have less restrictions. Take that into consideration when we're sharing our story and our advice and takeaways and insights. Also, none of us here in this video are cardiologists. Always, before changing anything or doing anything drastic in terms of your heart health, always do that in conversation with your cardiologist, right? Now, right, let's actually start now with the video slash episodes, and let's kick off by meeting Karen and George and learning who they are and what heart disease they have. And let's start with Karen.
So I have arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. It's caused by a gene variant And I found out 2 years ago when I went into sustained ventricular tachycardia. So I spent 3 weeks in hospital and they couldn't work out what was wrong, had genetic testing, and it came back gene positive, and I was given the diagnosis of ACM.
Why did you actually have to spend 3 weeks in the hospital?
So, as I said, I went into sustained ventricular
Ah, yeah, yeah.
tachycardia
Hmm.
and I spent a week in my local hospital, but I became very, very unwell whilst I was in there. I went into a rhythm that they really struggled to get me out of. So they sought a second opinion from a specialist heart hospital in London, and I was transferred there. And I spent 2 weeks in that hospital and had numerous tests, as I'm sure we've all been through.
Yeah.
And yeah, that came back as a diagnosis along with an ICD
Hmm.
being fitted.
Like, did you feel unwell before you were going to the hospital, or like, did you do
Yeah.
something that triggered it that they know of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I had always been very fit and healthy. I'd always looked after myself. I had ironically taken up running about 5 years before, which I now know was actually a big no-no. I shouldn't have done that, but I obviously didn't know at the
But
time.
any kind of running, or just the kind that you were doing? Like maybe you were
No,
running
I
on a
think,
very
yeah,
fast
I
pace,
think,
or I don't know.
yeah. I mean, probably, I used to jog and then I used to do park runs. So at the end of the park run, there's always that last, hit. I used to do Zumba classes, which were, fun but very active. And I I think also the gene variant I have is specific to exercise for
Yeah.
what they know at the moment. Started exercising, and it was probably about 18 months before I became very unwell that I started to feel a bit off. My exercise tolerance started to dip, and I was finding it harder to do the runs that I did.
Hmm.
And I was having dizzy spells, heart palpitations. I
While
felt really
running,
tired.
or
All the time.
okay.
Yeah, so the exercise tolerance definitely, I couldn't reach the 5K anymore.
Yeah.
So that eventually became a walk. And the rest of the other symptoms could be at any time of the day. I could be sat at my desk and suddenly feel overwhelmed with tiredness.
Mm.
And initially it was put down to menopause.
Mm.
So a year and a half of trying medication for that. But
Oh,
fortunately, my GP just said, this is not normal
yeah.
and referred me to the hospital. But actually, the hospital never got to the bottom of it. Unfortunately, during that period of time is when I became critically unwell. And it was then after that that the diagnosis was made kind of a bit late really in the process. So yes, I did start to feel that there was something wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it.
So that's Karen. You're gonna see more of her throughout the video slash episode. Now let's meet George, right? And let's ask him what heart disease he has.
I have a heart condition called DSP cardiomyopathy. DSP relates to desmoplakin, which is a kind of protein which helps to hold the cell junctures together. And in my case, and in people who have DSP cardiomyopathy, that protein is lacking, or there's a lower supply of it. I only discovered that I had it in December last year, 2024. I had a previous history with heart issues. So I'm 32 now, but when I was 19, I was taken to hospital in Rome because I was having the symptoms of a heart attack, basically. So
Yeah.
having pain radiating across the chest and the back. I was vomiting relentlessly. And anyway, they took me to the hospital and discovered that my heart muscle was swollen. And so they kept me in intensive care for a bit, and then I was kept in hospital. At the time, they just said, yeah, you're really unlucky. This happens to young people, especially people who are quite active, quite sporty, which I am or was more at the time. And they just put it down to an infection, like a viral infection, which causes myocarditis, which is a swelling of the heart muscle. I returned to Belgium to see a cardiologist, and I was followed by the cardiologist for about 4 years, and he put me on medication. I went back for my yearly check, and they said to me, everything looks good. You're kind of out of that phase of just like post-event phase.
Okay.
You can come off the medication and you can pretty much entirely live normally. And
Great news.
I'd like, yeah, super. I'd like to see you maybe every 5 years just to be 100% sure. About 2 years ago, I was living in Canada. I spent a year there with my partner, and I was getting chest pains basically, but not the kind of heart attack sort of symptoms, but just like almost like someone was like poking the area of the chest where the heart is. Very, like, quite repeatedly. It was thanks to my partner in the end who said to me, you know, when we go back to Belgium, you should get this checked out. And so I did. They did another MRI scan a decade after my first one. And then they said, something has changed here. And it shouldn't have changed. They suggested I see a geneticist. And I did. And one of the first things the geneticist asked me, apart from the family history, was, do you have dry skin on your hands and feet? And I said, yes, I do, strange enough, but why do you ask that? And he basically explained to me that there's this somewhat rare gene mutation called DSP, and people who have it have the following symptoms. The hard skin is one of them, and the heart problem is another. And so, I got the results in December last year.
All right, so that's Karen and George. Again, you will hear more about them throughout the video/episode. Now let's take a moment to talk about hearing the news that you have heart disease. Maybe you just recently heard this, or perhaps there is some appointment coming up where you might come to hear it, that you have a heart disease. Now let's get Dr. Sears involved, and let's ask him what he would say to someone, to perhaps you, if you just heard the news that you have heart disease.
Well, I think one of the challenges when you're given a diagnosis like this is, what does it mean? And there's both a problem-focused approach and an emotion-focused approach. The problem-focused approach involves identifying what this disease is and what its implications are, and what can you do to control it, and what are the expectations that you can have from it. That involves the very concrete cognitive side of thinking, if you will. How do you think about what you've been told? I think most medical providers are excellent at anticipating those questions and trying to give the best information that's available. Where our healthcare systems often break down is on the emotion-focused side, where we say, I know this is emotional for you, we'll see you in 3 months. And there is no plan. There's not a way to address that in a typical cardiac clinic. Our healthcare systems were created with a focus on the biologic or physiologic. The psychologic side was pushed aside for many reasons, stigma being one of the biggest. Also, I think healthcare systems didn't know what to do with this. There weren't a lot of trained psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers who were ready to synthesize biologic and psychologic components. So there just wasn't anybody to find. The biologic side is well addressed by medical teams, I think, around the world now. But the psychologic side gets pushed to the side out of uncertainty and stigma and the lack of a start and a finish. And instead, the emotional side remains this sort of unfolding, new challenges, new questions, and patients and families are often left to sort it out on their own.
All right, so that's Dr. Sears, and you're also gonna see and hear much more from him throughout the video/episode. Now, while I don't remember really anything of how I felt or specific thoughts that I had when I heard the news that I had or have a heart disease, Karen and George do know what it was like, because for them it happened not so long ago. So let's actually ask them, starting with Karen, what she was feeling or what thoughts were coming up in her when she heard the news that she had heart disease.
To be honest, I think when I'd spent the 3 weeks in hospital, I didn't even know if I was going to come out of hospital, which might sound quite dramatic, but I really was very poorly. So when they gave me that diagnosis, I think I just kind of felt numb. I'd always been really fit and healthy.
Yeah.
I thought heart disease was for maybe for people who didn't maybe look after themselves,
Hmm.
which I now know is very ignorant. And I also didn't really understand what arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy was, and I wasn't given a lot of information about it either. So I've spent a lot of time researching it myself, obviously reaching out to projects like the Heart Warrior Project and meeting people like myself to try and understand a bit more about it.
Yeah.
But at the time, yeah, absolutely devastated.
All right, and let's hear what George has to say on how this was like for him to hear this news.
Part of me wanted to have clarity on what was happening, and so in a way I was happy that I knew what was going on, and it wasn't just endless tests and we have no idea what's happening to you. So part of me was not happy but relieved in a way, but then but then then as I started to process it, obviously I realized that it's not particularly good news. So no, I felt like I wanted to cry immediately afterwards, but then I kind of kept it together as I do too often, especially as men. We need to cry more, but we don't. And then so the immediate feeling was kind of just, okay, wow, that's a shock, but let's keep it together and see what happens. And then obviously in the days leading up to Christmas, I think it was, that's when it all started to dawn on me, and that's when I came across the Heart Warrior Project, because I couldn't sleep one night and just started doing lots of research, which is not always a good idea, but because you read all sorts of things, but thankfully I came across some good stuff as well, including you and the Heart Warrior Project. So
now let's take a moment to focus on talking about feeling weak. Many people that I've talked to with heart disease have felt that they were fragile, weak, defect, and even, not good enough because of this disease that they have, this heart disease. And in a way, it makes sense that you feel like that, right? Because the heart disease can put up restrictions and limitations that you normally would have just been able to do if you just didn't had that. Now, when I was young, I never really felt that. It was really in my early 20s, like I think when I was 21, there was one of the first moments that I felt weak, fragile, and defect. When I was 18 to 21, I traveled for 3 years around the world. Whole story, not for this video. And when I came back, I had the question of like, well, what do I want to do with my life? So I knew that I loved exercising, and even more, I love adventurous kind of activities. I also knew that I loved helping people. It's been a core value of me. Something that just came on my path was like, okay, the army. I wanted to go for the special forces and become a medical unit. I enlisted, I went through all the intellectual tests, I went through all the physical tests, through all the medical tests, passed everything with good scores, except, of course, I got a no because of my heart disease. My cardiologist even wrote a whole kind of paper saying that it was actually okay. I went through a ablation to actually try to get rid of the heart disease, or to reduce it at least. Went for a board of doctors for the army to defend myself. I still got a no. And I remember that day still quite well. I remember me walking to my car after hearing that no from the whole board of doctors. Sitting in my car, and that's the first moment where I just really deeply felt like I was weak, fragile, and defect because of this heart disease. Now, before I share more about my story of feeling weak and fragile because of that experience, I actually want to ask George about his experience, because he too has felt this way.
it was a huge hit to be told that I that was it. Like that, I could never do any strenuous exercise, or even like you were saying earlier, 130 BPM is my limit, and that's really very little. It's something, but it's really quite little. So I feel it. I mean, in terms of sport and exercise, I think has always been a big part of my identity as well, and being active and all those things, and pushing like pushing myself and that sort of things. Just things I would have been able to do before. I just have to be so much more careful of now, and it has like a psychological effect as well about how weak. Yeah, I don't know about you, but it makes me just feel weak and like almost fragile.
Yeah.
Like you can't.
Yeah, fragile.
Yeah.
While you know what you're able or capable of doing, right?
Yeah.
You know you're able to do all those activities with ease, but somewhere you also know in your head, but this is gonna make it worse for my heart, and so it makes you feel fragile in a sense, for sure.
Totally. Yeah. Like you would as an older person, I guess. If you were old and frail, it's almost like that. Like, oh, don't, and then other people kind of react to that, or don't, like particularly members of my family who say, "Oh no, don't do that. Don't pick that up, or don't," and that just feels so kind of restrictive and difficult, because then people view you as that's going to take some time to get used to, I guess.
So let's ask Dr. Sears actually what he would say to someone who feels weak, fragile, defect, or not good enough because of their heart disease.
When something's been taken from you, you do feel weaker. And if someone were to say to you, there's a mutation in you, it's easy to feel weak again. It's easy to feel like something's wrong with you. Somehow you're damaged goods or broken stock. And I think part of that means then it's not just some sort of magic words, but rather working through this and talking about, well, what's broken? What's been taken and what's still here? Mm-hmm. Meaning that take some inventory about, well, what are the other strengths that you have? Because I think there's a tendency when something's taken from you to be focused on what's been lost. The psychologic task is to move from what's been lost to what you still have. Now, that can sound, pop psychology or something, but it's really not. It's the idea that what we pay attention to does affect our mood. So if you pay attention to what's been lost all the time, then you never really turn toward what you still have. And this is a process, in my view, this is this concept of moving from victim to survivor of something. That the victimhood must be there. There is victimness. You do need to attend to what's been lost. It is a loss, and you can't simply think it away. Rather, it needs to be made sense of, so a sense of coherence about it. Why did this happen? Don't know. Did I do anything wrong? Probably not. Is there anything I should do about it? Well, your medical team's going to put a plan in place. Well, what's going to happen to me? Well, what we know is we probably can do quite well with this condition if now that we know you have it, we put stops in place like defibrillators and beta blockers and other kinds of medicines and ablations and put things in place so that then you can move from what's been lost to, okay, now what do I got? So I'm still able to walk and do fun things. I just probably can't run marathons anymore. I still have the very nature of who I am. I still have empathy and sincerity and love, and ultimately developing some hope about the future. What can I do now that I maybe wouldn't have done if that wasn't true? It's got to be not just make sense of what's been lost, but also it's got to be move to the future and then build the future, magnify the future. Nothing can do justice to the complexity of living with heart disease. I can't do justice to it with a few comments. I approach it with great reverence because I think this is the nature of being a person on this planet. The nature of being somebody who has adversity, encounters it, experiences it, makes sense of it, then turns toward the future, finds a way through it. That person has wisdom beyond their years. I think that is, in fact, the hallmark achievement.
Now, to come back to what I was sharing, to my story of, that moment when I felt weak because of the army and getting that no. In the end, things turned out well and turned out fine, right? I found my way. I found another path. And I kind of want to just share that insight because perhaps you also will receive a certain limitation because of your heart disease, a certain job that you can't do, a certain activity like a hobby or a sport that you can't do anymore now. It's like a certain path that now is kind of crossed off. It can be very disorientating when that happens because that really happened for me. At that moment, I was like, what do I do now? That limitation made me look for other possibilities, other things. And I really found this path of, psychology. And I found this deep love and passion for it, creating this project, Inner Path Seekers, which is a mental health project, doing a lot of work with clients there and a lot of work with other organizations on mental health. And then also creating the Heart Warrior project, right? Do know that it does not have to define you, this heart disease and the restrictions that you might have been given because of it. There are other paths to be taken in life where you can feel the same amount of joy, satisfaction, and meaning that you would have felt with that one path that you can't take now anymore. And maybe even more, at least from my experience, that has been true. Now, finally, on this topic of feeling weak and fragile because of your heart disease, let's give the mic back to Dr. Sears because I was very curious actually to ask him the following question. Is it harder for men or women to hear that they have a diagnosis like heart disease? Is there something on that you know of?
Yeah, so sex differences have been looked at over and over again. And there are two key findings. First, across all samples, virtually all samples beginning with adolescents, women are more likely to acknowledge psychological distress. Across the entire lifespan, women are much more likely to acknowledge emotional distress. We don't know if they're really that different, but they certainly acknowledge it when we ask them from research participants. So then when you go and look at the data in patients with heart disease, in general, you do still see a sex effect with women being more emotional about it. It does seem to peter out a little bit as you get further into the lifespan. You get up to the 70s and 80s, the effect is almost gone. There are a lot of reasons for that. You have men sort of less dying off a little bit, if you will. I mean, the lifespan of men in the Western world is slightly lower than women. So there is some selection bias that occurs over time. But in general, women are more likely to tell you that this was distressing to them. I think you're hitting at a different question, though, and that is the behavioral changes necessary from heart disease harder on men than women? I don't know the answer to that. I think in general, when you look at cardiac rehab data, so people who have had a heart problem and now are getting some sort of care, like a rehabilitative approach, men tend to get a lot of support from their spouses in traditional relationships. You don't see that quite as much with women. Men maybe aren't as good of a support system. So it's hard to say. Maybe it's the case that men complain about the changes more than women, but we don't know much about their outcomes otherwise. Men perhaps have a little bit harder time with being limited, told that you can't do something. There tends to be a little bit more of a pushback, perhaps.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. A disease demasculating you in some sense.
So one of the things we do see in men is heart disease does feel like some of their masculinity has been taken, that their so-called ability to do big, hard workouts been taken from them. And so we do see sometimes some reckless behavior to basically reassert masculine aspects, to say, well, then, I'm gonna flex in other ways. I mean, often destructive ways, things like, well, I can still drink you under the table, or I could still, I'm still a tough guy, and or I can still work longer than everybody else, or there are ways in which traditional male characteristics can become magnified in the post-heart condition patient, where there is an attempt to assert masculinity. It can be discouraging to see sometimes, because I think any scripted kind of behavior, like, oh, if I do this, I'll be more like X, I'll be more like a macho man if I can do this. Typically, the people in our lives typically want us to just be ourselves. That most of the people who love you really want you to just be you. Your ability to do marathons, your ability to accomplish some occupational task, the people who love you actually probably don't care that much about that, but because it's been taken from you, it becomes something that you want to magnify.
Is there some message in here that you would say to some guy listening right now who might need that message?
I think when we have beliefs about ourselves, it may or may not be true. So the key, whether you've changed in some way, is to check it out with other people in your life who know you well. Things like, have you noticed me change any? Have you noticed that I'm more anxious? Have you noticed that I don't act the same as I did before? Get feedback. I think it's hard as a heart patient because you may or may not have anybody in your family that has the condition. And so you can end up feeling like you're the only one that could feel these things. And if you never ask anyone, for example, if you never asked, hey, do you ever get really nervous at work? Like maybe you're not as good at this as you should be? And if you ever asked anybody that, everybody at work goes, we all feel that way. But you don't know that if you don't ask. Now, that can be awkward, and I'm not suggesting we all go, stand in our office and talk about our emotions and our insecurities, but I am suggesting that there are people in our lives who that's a safe, trusting question for. And so I think ask the people that love you, hey, have you noticed anything different about me lately? Or, do you still see me as a tough guy? Do you still see me as the person that you fell in love with? Do you still see me the way that you saw me 10 years ago? Or any sort of checkout, check out how have I changed and see if they have any ideas. My guess is often people will say, no, you're a little bit more emotional some days. But most times people will be like, the people who love you, know you well, will say, no, for the most part, you're yourself. I wish you weren't worried about being more masculine. I wish you weren't worried about something bad happening to you. I wish I wasn't worried as your loved one. I wish I wasn't sometimes overreactive when I can't call you on the phone or I can't reach you. I wish I could, and then you have an interaction about two people both trying to change or adapt to each other in the most wholesome, loving kind of way. So I think it can open a conversation sometimes.
Before we dive into the rest of the video/episodes, I just want to take a short moment to ask that if you found in any way the video/episode so far helpful, or any of the previous content that you have watched or meetups that you have joined, consider supporting this project. Because, at the moment, most of the money to keep this project alive is coming out of my pockets. It's just not sustainable that way. And there's a couple of ways that you can support it. One way is through checking out our merch. We have pullovers, t-shirts, we have mugs, we have birthday cards, we have a water bottle to store something hot or cold in. There's options and they're all with different designs, and the designs have all been created with artists that I personally know. So there's a lot of care and quality behind each piece of merch. Now, if you're not much interested in any merch, then you can also leave a donation. You can buy me a virtual coffee using Ko-fi. Same principle as leaving a donation. And I will not buy a coffee from that. I will again put that money into this project to keep it alive and to just produce more content. Or you can also become a Heart Warrior patron. If you really love what I'm doing here, then for a small monthly fee, you can support this project on a monthly basis. It's not a lot of money, but it does add up if more people do it. With the Patreon, if you become a exclusive member, then you also unlock a couple of perks. We have like a beautifully crafted wallpaper that you can use for your laptop, for your phone, for your tablet, or you can even print it out and hang it somewhere in your house as an artwork. There is also exclusive content that you unlock, and last but not least, your name will be added to our wall of Heart Warrior patrons, so your name can go down in history as someone who helped to keep this project alive. So you can find all those ways located in the description. I will put a link there. Or you can also go directly to heartwarriorproject.com/get-involved to find the same page with the information on how you can support this project. All right, so let's move on and talk about another quite common thing, and that is grief, an identity crisis, and acceptance. I kind of meshed them up in this kind of chapter here. There are days where it's quite easy for me to accept that I have this heart disease, and then there are days where I just struggle a lot with it. It's not like a linear, line where one day you struggle with it and then the next day you're completely fine and you are always going to be fine with the heart disease that you have. Also, grief, right? We often associate grief with just losing someone, but you can grieve about many things. Also, losing something like a job change or your life completely being flipped upside down, like, receiving this diagnosis that you have heart disease. There's also grief involved in this. There's a certain person that you've lost, right? And there's this new version of you, and you have to go through this grieving of letting go, of coming to terms, of accepting this new version that you are right now. Many people, I think, don't know that they're actually going through a grieving process because, again, they associate it mainly with just, grief. Oh, it's when you lose someone. Now, a quote that I want to share, and I want to add some more information afterwards to it, is the following one. Don't pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to handle a difficult life. Life is not gonna be easy for no one. Like, that's one of the easiest guarantees that you can give to someone, is that life is going to be very difficult at times. When you have heart disease, when you've been given this diagnosis at a young age, life becomes a lot less carefree and a lot more challenging. I mean, my life would be so much easier, like way easier, if I did not had to carry the heart disease around that I have. We can't pray for an easy life because that's just not gonna happen. Instead, I think we gotta focus on finding strength in something. And I've used this word, I've shared these words in more videos than just this one, but I'm gonna repeat it again here because it's important. There's a lot of power in the words that you use and that you put in your head. I've tried to call myself less of a heart patient and more of a heart warrior. Again, words have power. How you call yourself, there's meaning behind it, right? We associate words with certain feelings. Being a heart patient is more being in a passive role. Something bad happened to us and we're kind of handed over to other experts to take care of us. Being a heart warrior is someone who, despite the obstacles, is still able to stand up, even though they don't always feel strong, right? Even if you feel weak, you can still stand up. Who takes action, who tries to still build a good future, who has courage, resilience, and who tries to fight on despite what has happened to them. Now, with that, I am not saying that you should always be and feel like a heart warrior, because I don't feel like that all the time either. I don't think that's good. It's okay also sometimes to feel just like a heart patient. Why I'm sharing this word is just that I want to offer it as another possibility to have in your toolbox of words. Because again, words have power. And it might sound kind of silly, right, to use another word to call yourself, but you gotta find ways to find strength. Because again, life is not going to be easy, or not always, and it's certainly not easy when you have heart disease already on top of everything else that life throws at you. So there has to be ways to find strength to carry on. That's what I would offer you. Call yourself more a heart warrior instead of a heart patient. Now let's get Karen back into the video/episode, and let me ask her actually on how, she's dealing with accepting the heart disease that she has.
I know when we first met, I remember our first Hot Warrior Project meetup that I joined. I didn't say a word. I just listened because at that point, as I say, I was crying all the time. I still find it hard. There are sometimes I think because it is the grieving process that you feel sad because you've lost so much. Plans for the future are changed. But sometimes I feel like I'm talking about someone else. Other times I feel really proud of myself. Specifically, I suppose, or particularly if I'm speaking to a friend or a loved one, and they might sort of say, "But do you remember this?" And I can realize then how far I've come. since the diagnosis, which is a long way. So yeah, sometimes I do feel quite proud of myself. And I think that's important. I think it's important for us all to acknowledge the journey we're on and our successes during that time, because they're very different to maybe what we would have, challenges we were maybe thinking we would face,
Yep.
as we get older. So these are new challenges, and I still try to face them head on.
I think we're all going to face health challenges as we grow older.
Yeah.
But it's like, when you're this age, it's like, oh God, already now?
Yeah.
That's rare, right?
Yeah.
That's way more rare
100%.
than...
Yeah.
way
And it's your
older.
heart, you know?
Yeah,
Heart and your brain. You basically can't survive, can you? So,
yeah.
and I feel sad sometimes that my heart's a bit broken. I think it's in there trying to do its best,
Yeah.
keeping me alive. And, it's been going for over 50 years, so it's not done too badly. But it's a bit of a weird thing.
Being in a young body, but being with a, broken heart in certain ways
Yeah.
is a weird
100%.
thing to live with.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, I know we've had the conversation before about being a heart warrior or a heart patient. Sometimes I feel like a heart warrior. Other times I 100% feel like a heart patient. When you're in that hospital, and for me, it's the same hospital. I go through the same entrance that I remember being wheeled in from the ambulance. That's the entrance that I got taken in. That's the entrance I go in for my appointments. Just everything about that reminds me of what I went through. So there are days, when it just depends what hat I've got on. Whereas my therapist said it's about putting your crown on, which I love. So she said sometimes you need to put on your crown and sort of acknowledge the queen that you are. So sometimes I think, today I've got this.
Yeah.
And I'm going for that today. And the first, there are so many things that I've been really anxious about, such as traveling, going places on my own. I still have that because I am frightened that, what if I did collapse? Because at the end of the day, I'm taking the medication, I've got the ICD, but what if the ICD does go off? It's there for a reason. And that's one of the things I sometimes forget. That it's in there because I have this heart disease and I am at risk of cardiac arrest, but I'm doing everything I can to hopefully stop it from happening. And God willing, it won't. Maybe that was it for me, that event that I had 2 years ago, that was it. So sometimes I just feel like it's very difficult, as you say, to sort of know who you are on that particular day. But for most days, I try to just be me and not the person that's got this disease if I can. But it's taken a while to get here. It's not something. And I also think it's really important to allow yourself to acknowledge what you've been through and to acknowledge that you have a heart disease, because if you just try to sweep it under the carpet and never really think about it and acknowledge it, you can't process it and deal with it. And I don't think there's any weakness in that. I just think it's really important that you do get to acknowledge it. And knowledge is power. So it's really important to speak with other people, to speak to a cardiologist, find out what you can so that you can face it. But it's a big thing. It is a big thing.
And of course, let's also get George back into the video/episode. And let's, also ask him, but focusing more on grief and, how he's dealing with the grief that he is experiencing around the heart disease.
Glad you mentioned that word, because that is the, I think that is what's happening. I remember shortly after my operation, I went to Scotland. I went to a Buddhist monastery for a little bit just to take some time out, and then I stayed in a little cabin, and it had a little fireplace outside, and so I made a point of having a fire by myself and kind of going through that process of like, okay, almost a ritual of some sort. I mean, we don't really have rituals in at least in my culture, where we don't really have that as much as we used to, but there was something nice about just having a fire, kind of saying, okay, this part of me is gone or going now, and so this is there was this, I like the kind of symbolism of that. It was quite,
I love that.
It's quite helpful.
I think people with heart disease, me included actually, right? It's just after my cardiac arrest that I sort of had all this more on my mind, which is just the last 4 years. But having some kind of a ritual exactly to really know, there is actually a grieving process perhaps that I'm going through, to to recognize that. I think a lot
Yeah.
don't recognize it, actually, that's what they're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. The tendency is just to carry on, I think, isn't it? Just
Yeah. Now, let's also take a moment to talk about this identity crisis, because this can really happen, and it has happened to me, because again, as you know now, I love exercise, especially adventurous things. I loved alpinism. I loved climbing high altitude mountains, but that's a definite no. I am not allowed for my cardiologist to do that anymore. And it just sucks to kind of close that chapter. I didn't felt ready to close it. I was always that guy who was very adventurous, but I'm not exactly that guy anymore. So I'm trying to reorientate to who I am. It's not like I don't have any idea, right? But it's just it's a process, right? Now, obviously, I, asked this question to Dr. Sears to get his professional insights. So yeah, here is actually Dr. Sears sharing what he would say to someone who feels like they're going through some kind of identity crisis.
Well, you hit it exactly right. This is no longer just simply you have a heart condition. Now, what you're talking about is this idea that who we are is a composite of our temperament and our disposition, as well as our daily behaviors and our likes and our values. And some of those likes and values get ripped away with this. So this isn't just, hey, this is an effect on the cells in your heart, right? Quite the opposite. It's an effect across your entire lifespan. We've shown for almost 30 years now that young people are the most challenged psychologically to deal with a heart condition. Being less than 50 years of age, in virtually every study, and we're talking probably 10,000, so I don't know, maybe that many of that studies, young people consistently have the most challenges. And in the situation that you just described, a young person being diagnosed with a cardiomyopathy, that one of the major things we think happens to young people is it so much affects their forecast about life. So what's going to happen to me is much more salient or strong for that young person. The second thing that's really important is that when heart disease hits a younger person, less than 50, the sword, the samurai sword through their life, dissects things like their work, their love life,
Yep.
their financial life, their parenting life, their lifestyle. So it's just a sword through their life. And it decimates it in a way, in such a way that you then have to say, okay, now that there's a break point in my life now between what I used to do and what I'm going to do now, that's where we start to get into, okay, now we do have that identity change. Now, one of the challenges as you and I talk about this is that not all patients with arrhythmic disorders need significant changes, but some do, right? Patients with arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, some of our patients that have those kinds of conditions, some of the channelopathies we sort of pay attention to as like, okay, yeah, let's think about how we're going to manage this condition. But I don't like the idea, other than for the ARVC or arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy patient, I don't like the idea of everybody's got to be limited. But we do recognize in some of these conditions that excessive exercise
Yeah.
can be a problem. So it's a tough one because most of our conditions we don't look for limitations as much, but in arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathies we do say, well, excessive exercise should be avoided. We still say people need to do stuff. I mean, we don't want people doing nothing. We just, of course, as you mentioned, transforming from somebody who did lots of exercise and then being told that exercise, unlike everybody else in the world, that exercise is leading to worse health. That's a strange message.
So let me add 2 additional things that I have actually done to help me with this kind of identity crisis. And the first thing is actually to make a list and to write down everything that you can still do despite the heart disease. If you have this heart disease and you have been said no to certain activities or certain things that you normally did do and you can't do them anymore, we often have the tendency to just focus on those and feel because of that like, oh no, I can't do anything anymore in life now. While there is just a whole list of other things that you can still do, even though that you have this heart disease. At anything, right? Like going for a walk, for example, in nature, having a drink, going to a bar, spending time with friends, giving a hug, like just anything, right, that comes to mind that you're still able to do despite the heart disease. And you will see that the list is quite vast of things that you can still do. Keep that list with you, right? Like on your phone or somewhere in your house. And each time, write something more to that list. Add something more that you can still do despite the heart disease that you have. And this kind of opens up this narrow view that we might have from what we can't do anymore, and kind of opens it up again to just see all the options and possibilities that we do still have. And the other thing that I would give as a piece of advice is that you gotta redefine perhaps certain things. And, let me explain a bit. So I had to redefine what adventure actually meant. For me, that word adventure always was associated with like kind of maybe dangerous things like alpinism, very adrenaline focused activities. But I recently picked up kayaking. And actually, I discovered that I had the same feelings, I mean, not the exact same, but similar feelings that alpinism provided to me, or scuba diving. There was this sense of exploration, this, preparation of the equipment, which I actually kind of like. You gotta plan out already a few days before, check the weather, check the current, check the wind, check the height of the water. It still provides certain elements, certain things that I do feel or did feel with alpinism. There are actually for you as well, if there is a certain activity that you've been said no to that you really loved, look for alternatives that have similar elements to that one activity that you can't do anymore. Alright, so moving to the next chapter here of this video, let's talk about what people misunderstand about having heart disease. And let's ask Karen and George actually about their experience, starting with George.
The thing that comes to mind immediately is goes back to this word of progressive in a way, because I've had it happen once or maybe twice. Someone sort of say, "Oh, okay, well you had this operation, so it's resolved, right?" and I get that, and I think often we think of like surgery or operations as almost like solutions, things that I don't know, you have a broken bone or you have, I don't know, whatever it may be,
sure,
and you kind of have a neat resolution to it. And I've never used the word progressive before in talking to people about it, but part of me feels like I would like that would be helpful to better explain to people, because otherwise it can feel like, okay, oh, you had that really difficult event back in at the beginning of the year when you had your surgery, and you kind of felt like everyone was there and supportive and everything, and then that's kind of as it does, it's normal, and that kind of trickles away, and
yep,
people go back to their normal lives. But I guess in answer to your question, it's the idea of that this is something for life, and it's something that could or may or may not get worse, and it's not just something that you can tie up and say, okay, that was difficult and it's done now, and you go back. You don't go back. Your life is completely turned upside down. So,
and let's ask Karen now what she would actually say on this.
Probably the anxiety of, as we said, I think it refers back to something you mentioned earlier about the fact that on the outside we look normal. So every day I get up, I go for a walk before I start work, then I work. Then there's things after work with family and friends. And so I guess because I want to live a normal life, I'm trying my best not to let this be a disability as such, even though it's not technically classed as a disability, but it feels like one because there are days when I do not feel right.
Yep.
And it's very hard to explain that. And I don't always want to be explaining to people that, today I just feel a bit off because they're never going to understand what it's like to have a heart that doesn't pump fully. So to try to explain to someone, I just feel a bit funny. I don't know how to describe how I feel. I just don't feel right. Maybe a bit fragile. I don't know how to describe it. And so I think probably that. I think sometimes, they're in a bit of denial as well. I know certainly when I have talked to family members and I talk about the future and what my life might be like. And a lot of the time it's no, 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 everything's going to be fine,
Right.
because for them it's hard to acknowledge, I think.
Hmm.
It is scary. I think if I turn the tables around, how would I feel if it was one of my loved ones?
Hmm.
But I think until you've walked in someone's shoes with this, I don't think anyone can fully understand.
Hmm.
I mean, my husband has been with me to every appointment. He
Hmm.
came to see me every single day in hospital, despite that our hospital, or the hospital I was in, is 150 miles away. He traveled every day. He was there. Um, and he can see that I'm probably not the same person. I know he's really proud of me, because I just try to live my life as best I can. But yeah, I don't think anyone can really ever understand as much as they will try. So
Yeah.
I would I'm always very grateful that they try to understand, if that makes sense, because maybe you can't expect them to. How do you describe taking medication every day that makes you feel unwell? How do you describe surgery or what it's like to live with an ICD? But that could probably be the same for all kinds of illnesses or
I think there are certain illnesses or I think cancer, for example, and I often say cancer because, but I think people are way more empathic towards someone who has that
100%.
diagnosis
Yeah.
because we have seen it from movies. There's a visual that we can attach to how that might look and that it might, go very quick and it's horrible, right? Cancer. But there it evokes a lot more feelings into people. There
Yeah.
it's immediately like, oh my God, that's horrible. Heart
Mm.
disease is more like, it's like, I mean, at least from my experiences, people are like, but you look fine now, right? So that's really
Yes.
been a response that
Yeah.
I've often heard. It doesn't evoke the same feelings as it does with cancer. I still think it's quite horrible in many ways as well, heart disease.
I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't get the airtime.
All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about is about support. Because having heart disease is not nothing and it can be a lot to deal with, especially if you feel like you have to deal with it alone. And it can certainly feel like that. It can certainly seem like you are just the only one. Because perhaps, no one in your close by circle has heart disease, which thank God for them, right? But that can be lonely. Support is huge, and I always, think that there's like three kind of support systems that I think are good to have in place. The first one is like friends, family, or a spouse, someone that you trust and that you can talk with about this. The second one is like professional support, which includes perhaps like a psychologist. And then the third layer of support is a support group, I think. Other people who also are going through something similar like you, like another heart disease or heart disease in general. That can be huge. That can be so huge to feel like you have found people who can come closer to understanding what it's like to live with all this. Now let's ask George and Karen where they have found support, right? What safe places they have discovered that have been helpful to deal with their heart disease. And let's start with George.
I mean, honestly, yeah, it's the Heart Warrior Project. I mean, I've got my mug.
Hey,
And,
cheers, man.
cheers. I mean, that has been huge. I think I only joined the first like online meetup 3 months after my surgery. It took me a while to kind of get to that point where I was ready to talk to other people and that sort of thing. But it's been immensely helpful. Sometimes you get on and you don't say anything, or you mostly listen, and even that is just great, just to hear people. And everyone's going through very obviously similar things, but then they experience it differently, and different diseases, different stories, whatever. And then even from that, I've managed, Jamie and Karen have got in touch, and so we get to chat with Jamie as well, and speaking to Karen soon. So that has just been super helpful. Honestly, that's the biggest thing that's helped.
Because I didn't ask this question to get this out of you, right? Yeah. But I'm happy that you shared it. That's really all.
You set it up.
That means a lot to hear, right?
Yeah,
for me.
oh, of course.
But I'm also just in general curious if there's maybe something else that helps you deal with all this, if any.
I mean, one of the things that helps me, or helped me before as well, just generally with life's ups and downs and challenges, a big thing for me is spending time in nature, particularly in the forest, and so that is always a source of healing in some way. Like here where I am, this is actually the town where I grew up, here in Tervuren, and there's a beautiful forest just on the edge here, and so I'm really looking forward to just having that nearby. There's nothing like just a walk in the forest, sitting under a tree. I mean, obviously there's all the science around it of how incredibly beneficial it is for physical and mental health, but you don't even need to know that when you just, well, at least for me, when you're there to feel it. Exactly. So I'd say that's another thing that always helps me.
All right, and now let's see what Karen has to say. What has been helpful for her, where she has found support.
Well, I would definitely say, I'm going to say the Heart Warrior Project. 100%.
That's awesome.
Yes. Definitely things like online meetups. So finding communities that are built around people like us, being able to talk. I suppose initially when it started, it was people that I didn't know. So I just felt like I could be completely honest. So finding those online groups. But then actually the lovely thing that came from that was the more we got to know each other, the more honest actually I could be. So I can be myself. So if I'm having a bad day, and it's also, it's not just this we're coping with. There are other things that go on in life, family pressures, work pressures, all kinds of other things. And so we're already I suppose our stress levels are up here already. Then you have those other things. So it feels like we're up here, whereas probably most people are down here for most of the day. We're already up there. So being able to find a safe space like an online meetup, a group like that you can be yourself. Today I've had a really rough day, or my tablets this morning made me feel a bit rotten, or I had a test yesterday, or I've got an appointment next week, I'm a bit anxious about it. That's been really helpful. Certainly the online groups, on Facebook, Instagram, all those sorts of things are really helpful. But I do tend to cherry pick, so I'm very careful not to read too many negative posts, because we are all different, and heart disease affects everyone differently. Genetics are all different, and medication is different, age, absolutely everything. Sometimes it's nice to find like-minded people, but also you have to be careful what you're reading, I think. And also just safe places, being home with my family. I've always been a really strong stoical person, and I'm very independent. So I was always used to doing things by myself. If someone offered me help, I probably was the worst person, because I'd be going, no, I'm fine, I've got this, and I like to do it myself. I've actually had to learn to accept help, which has actually been quite hard, but because to me that's almost like not failure as such, but admitting I can't do something. But I've had to learn to say, oh yeah, actually, could you help me with that? Or I'm not feeling 100% today, would you mind just running that errand, or dropping my daughter, for example, down at what have you, or whatever it might be. Just a bit of help and support. I've had to learn to be able to ask.
Anything else that's been helpful for you dealing with heart disease?
I'm not saying I'm a keyboard warrior on the internet all the time, but for example, when I have my cardiology appointments, quite often there's terminology in there. I haven't got a clue what it means. So I'm very inquisitive, so I will ask. I do make sure I ask the questions. I do look things up online, but again, I'm very careful with the source of the information.
Yeah.
So in England, British Heart Foundation would definitely, so I'm just careful about the information that I do take, but I do try to broaden my knowledge on, the condition and my genetic condition as well.
I was actually very humbled that both George and Karen talked about the Heart Warrior Project and the meetup or the meetups that we organize, and that they have been places where they have experienced support. But by no means that was my intent to, get that out of them. But with that, you are definitely most welcome if you either survived a sudden cardiac arrest or you're at high risk for having one, to come and join us, right? They are free. We do them twice a month, and yeah, it's just an international group of heart warriors coming together and being there for each other. It has really become kind of a family with regulars and new people joining in, and it's been awesome for me as well. So check the description. I will place the link there to find more information about the meetup. All right, I think enough has been shared, right? To start wrapping up the video, this very in-depth video / episode. I really hope that, there was something that either me, Karen, George, or Dr. Sears shared that has stuck with you, that has made you feel slightly less alone, made you feel a bit supported, and perhaps even sparked a bit of hope in you. I really, really hope that. And know that you are not alone, right? There are other heart warriors out there, and reach out to me. Go to heartwarriorproject.com, go to the contact form, send me an email, right? I mean, I will come back and reach out to you, or send me a DM on Heart Warrior Project on Instagram. I will come to reply to you. You are not alone, and you don't have to do this alone. And finally, to wrap up this video, here is a last great reminder that Dr. Sears shared.
I think a big issue in adjustment is self-compassion. We talk about being compassionate to others all the time, and yet I think as patient, there's not the same compassion to yourself. Could you ever imagine seeing somebody who's been diagnosed with a condition and going, oh man, what a pain that is. Wow, you're not the guy you used to be. Nobody would ever do that, but that's exactly what we do to ourselves. So I think self-compassion, this ability to say, you are who you are, you're doing the best you can, and give yourself a little bit of credit. It's exactly the way the rest of us see you. Everybody else sees you as, hey, they're doing the best they can. Even when people do things that are sort of out of bounds, I think often they're trying to do the best they can. We have to help them. But I think, again, give yourself credit. You're doing the best you can.
Yeah, I think that's a good message. To regularly maybe hear again, trying to be a friend to yourself.